our seminar, embracing, releasing fear and embracing love. Let's read something first from Bhagavatam and from Bhagavad Gita. This topic is Bhagavatam 1:11-3. The sound of the Lord is identical with the Lord. As we have tried to explain by the non-dual position of the Lord, the material existence of our present status is full of fear. Out of 4 problems of material existence, namely the food problem, the shelter problem, the mating problem, the fear problem gives us more trouble than the others. We said yesterday, there's always fear in thinking about how we're going to maintain and arrange for all the other problems. We're always fearful due to our ignorance of the next problem. The whole material existence is full of problems, and thus the fear problem is always prominent. That is due to our association with the illusory energy of the Lord, known as Maya, or external energy. Yet all fear is vanquished as soon as there is the sound of the Lord, represented by His holy name. All, as it was sounded by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the following 16 words: Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. This is Bhagavatam 11:2-12. Bhayam, or fear, is caused by seeing something other than Krishna. Vichiyam vinavet sataha. Everything is actually an emanation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, as stated in the Vedanta Sutra, Janmadhyasa yataha, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, Aham Savasa Prabhavo. Here is from Bhagavatam also, 10:13-13, in relationship to the cowherd boys not fearing due to Krishna's association, presence, influence. When Krishna saw that his friends, the cowherd boys, were frightened, he, the fierce controller even of fear, said, just to mitigate their fear, "My dear friends, do not stop eating. I shall bring your calves back to this spot by a person going after them myself." Purport. In the presence of Krishna's friendship, a devotee cannot have any fear. Krishna is the supreme controller, the controller of even death, which is supposed to be the ultimate fear in this material world. Thus fear arises because of lack of Krishna consciousness. Otherwise, there cannot be any fear. For one who has taken shelter of the lotus feet of Krishna, the material world of fear becomes hardly dangerous at all. Okay, I want us to remember our homework assignment. We're going to hold it off for just a little while we do 1 or 2 things first. Let's see, Bhagavad Gita 9:34. I'll read this verse, and I'd like a few of you just to share with us what your basic understanding of this verse is. Very common verse. Man manababa ma bhakto ma jajimam namaskuru ma me vaishasi yuktaivam atmanama parayananha. Translation: engage your mind always in thinking of me. Become my devotee. Offer obeisances to me and worship me. Being completely absorbed in me, surely you will come to me. I want to read the report, but let me go the verse again. And this few you share what impressions, what this verse means to you. Krishna speaking. The last verse, the 9th chapter, the most confidential knowledge chapter, Krishna says, engage your mind always in thinking of me. Become my devotee. Offer obeisances to me. Worship me. Be completely absorbed in me. Surely you will come to me. What does this verse mean to you? Formula, coming back to God. Yes. Others? Security. Krishna is making an awesome promise. Anyone else? Yes.
It means hard work.
It means hard work. Krishna is letting us know what's available. We can somehow come up to be qualified to receive what is there for us. Yes?
Total dedication.
Total dedication. Engage your mind always in thinking of me. Anyone else? Surrender? Okay.
To be engaged 24 hours.
Engage 24 hours.
Krishna knows that the mind being matter will always run after matter. So he's saying when you engage it in me, thereby it will be steady.
Okay. Engage in me, the mind will be steady. And see, this is very powerful. What all you're saying is wonderful. It means work, it means surrender, it means security. It's a wonderful offering that Krishna is giving us. We can do the necessary. And the necessary that he's telling us, always engage the mind, thinking of me, become my devotee, worship me. And he says, and something powerful will happen. You're always thinking of me. You engage the mind, worshiping me, offering obeisance unto me. Says me. Says that you will come to me. Because you will be all for me and I will be all for you. After all, if you're always engaged, you're worshiping me, you're thinking of me, you have put me forefront in your consciousness as a priority. And therefore, Krishna is saying, so what you will get is you will get me. So this goes so much along with what we're discussing about some of the aspects of the mind, this particular enemy of the mind, Bhayam, devotees to be akuto, Bhaya, doubtless and fearless. But all of that has to do, of course, with what is happening in and with the mind. So the mind can make us, it can break us. According to what's happening in the mind, determines our level of consciousness, our level of devotion. According to what happens in the mind, determines how conditioned we are, or how free we are. According to what's happening in the mind, determines how we are giving into the senses, or how we are becoming free of the senses. And so it's a mystery, and it's a key opening the door to transcendence. It's a key for sadhana bhakti. It's a key from Shraddha to Bhav to Prema, based on what is happening with the mind. The mind can either be a lock and lock us out, spiritual world, out of many wonderful, amazing experiences. But the same mind can be a key that can open the door to so many wonderful opportunities that are ours. We have turned our backs on. And so we keep that in the back of our minds. We put that on hold. We file that. Krishna is saying, always give your mind in thinking of me, worship me, offer obeisances to me. And he's saying, and if you do that, then there's a guarantee that you will be able to come to me. So yesterday we asked you to reflect on some things during the day. We actually do as much as possible during the day. Just take notice of what you're thinking. Not what you're saying only, not what you're doing, particularly what you're thinking. Now, before we go to that, let's do one other thing. Yesterday we also put this list. We made a lot of lists. We put this of things that we would like most to happen. We thought about that. Things that we have the greatest fear about. We looked at the 20 or something things that we had a lot of fear about. We wanted to break it down to the 3 things. We have the greatest fear as a group here. And we found that the 3 things that our group find more challenging, it gives more anxiety, more disturbance, more anxiety about anticipation of what can happen, was offending devotees, losing devotee association, and failures. So we were having some discussion. We asked you to have dyads where you were talking 2 to 2, one-on-one with each other, about an area that you feel in your life that you're finding that you fear the most. And then we had some of you to share ways of how you are finding or have found techniques to deal with some of these 3 greatest fears. The fear of offending devotees, fear of losing devotees, and the fear of dealing with various failures. So I'd like to have 1 or 2 more people to share on these topics before we go into this internal dialogue, our homework assignment. So our 3 things, we asked you to give some report about the ways that you're finding to deal with some of these issues, to share with us, so we can learn from it. We're teaching each other here, interacting, participating. We mentioned how the best way we can learn something was to discuss it, or to participate with it, and most important, to teach it. So, the 3 things we want to focus on now is avoiding offenses to devotees, losing devotee association, and avoiding failure in our life. So can 2 of you share, someone didn't share yesterday, some ways how you are finding to deal with any of these 3 dominant areas. Are you finding ways to avoid offenses? Are you dealing with the fear of losing devotee association? How you are being less disturbed by possible failures, or how you are using failures for growth, for realization, understanding, or more spiritual acceleration, etc. Any one of these 3? Who'd like to start off first? That if he offends the devotees, he knows that he won't be able to chant offensively, profundity. And so he is considering, we identify ourselves as being Vaishnavas, and one of those major identifications, we make vows, vrats, we take initiation, honoring 4 principles, and to chant at least 16 rounds. We remind ourselves to avoid offenses in chanting. And so he does the mental gymnastic of reflecting on the fact that if he's offending devotees, then he's not going to be honoring his vow of chanting properly. And the chanting is not just the articulation, it's the whole culture of association. Vaishnava Gauri. One more person, please. Please share any of these areas. Offenses. And her efforts in trying not to lose the devotee association, realizing that in some cases the association there's too much incoherence, it's too rocky, if there's too much arguments, there's lack of appreciation of each other, that in time we will lose that association. So here were some arrangements that she did not want to see be dismissed. She wanted to be in touch with those people. And so she took the extra investigation of looking at what she's doing, what she's saying, to try to work on herself so that she would be able to have more quality association with others, and they would have more with her as well. So we'll move on. In other words, as we look at the many things that we fear, many things that we have as obstacles, we also look at how many times, in many ways, that we are successful. And by being more aware, attentive to our success, we can be more successful more times. We can be more actively successful. Success brings success. Certain things we do help us to be higher achievers. We want to study higher achievers. We want to study our own higher achievements so that we have more of that in our lives. Otherwise, we get overwhelmed by the mind, just developing a sense of defeatism, and causing us to minimize what we can, in fact, be about. Okay, now, we read this verse where Krishna can always think of me, always, he says. He didn't say it's 5% of the time or 95% of the time. He said, always think of me, worship me, offer obeisances, he says, and you get it. You get me. I am all for you. I want you to be all for me. I'm wanting you totally. I want you to position yourself to receive me totally. Therefore, I want to take a piecemeal of thinking of other things over me. That is love. When you want someone's love, someone loves you deeply, that you are so much prominent in their consciousness. So much of their life is centered around your well-being. So much of their life is centered around doing things that will make you happy, be pleasing to you, or be satisfying. They're thinking of you when they're with you. They're thinking of you when they're away from you. They are extremely happy when you're together. And so all of this is some reflections of what we ultimately have with Krishna and with each other in the spiritual world. Some small reflections. But the mind is enraptured, captivated attention with one's beloved. So we're looking at this now. How can we come to a point of being more enraptured love, animated love with Radha Nirishwar? They're speaking to us out of the Bhagavad Gita. He's saying, okay, it's about the thinking. They didn't say it's about the speaking. They didn't say it's about the work. The working and the speaking are supposed to help to impact and produce the proper thinking. We said this is the International Society for Work Consciousness. International Society for Debating. International Society for Philosophizing. International Society for Interpreting. International Society for Conjecture. International Society for Temple Building. International Society for Book Distribution. International Society for Farm Development. International Society for Restaurant Making. International Society for Devotee Making. All those things are part of it. We're the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. It's a matter of consciousness. So that means all the things that we do, if they don't somehow alter and advance our consciousness, then they are mechanical at best, and maybe even a distraction. We undergo all these angas. All of these things we do, hearing and chanting, remembering and praying and worshiping. All this is to bring out or to bring forth once again the proper consciousness. And the consciousness is what we are thinking. So today we're going to take a step back or take a step inward and look closer at what is happening in our consciousness. We are so much more of what we think or what we're thinking more than what we say and what we do. How many times we say one thing and we do something else, or we feel something else? Sometimes we're 3 or 4 different divisions. We do one thing, we say one thing, we think something altogether different. But we're trying to come to a point where we are working or doing things with Krishna. We're speaking about Krishna. We're remembering Krishna. So the mental process expression is fixed. And as that happens more and more, that is Krishna consciousness, and it pushes the other things out. So I need some volunteers here for a little while. Let's see. Let me have 2 volunteers. Who wants to volunteer for something they have no idea what they're going to be doing? Okay. Come up to the front. I have one more volunteer. Okay. One more volunteer. Okay, first, just to sit here for a while. So I want you to stand. Okay, first, I want you just very briefly to tell us everything today that you had for lunch. Alright? I want you to tell us everything that you ate today for lunch. Okay?
Everything.
Yeah. Hopefully you didn't fast. I know you're very stunned, but I'm sorry. And some days you don't eat. But I hope today that you were eating something.
They had salad. Everything was in the salad.
If you like. Especially if you like.
Tomatoes, lettuce, carrots, tahini dressing, some of those nice potatoes, roasted potatoes, cottage cheese, and mahapasha.
Alright, wonderful. Okay, that's all you had for lunch today. No sabji, no pakoras, no love jamuns, chapatis. Okay, very austere, very nice diet. Okay, thank you. Now, just hold that in mind. You can go back to your seat. Okay, I want you to stand. Okay, I want you to count the number of people in this room who are blonde. Blonde hair. Okay. All right. How many people do you? Some of the men you can't tell, they got shades. You can guess, but you can look at the secret, you can see it. 4. Okay, I have a seat. Alright. Now, why did I do such a stupid thing? Now notice, when I had these two devotees up here, just reflect on what you were thinking. Some of you were thinking, why is Maharaj asking these ridiculous questions? Some of you were thinking, what is he up to? What's the meaning of that? What's the significance? Some of you started, while they were talking, some of you were thinking about what you were eating, what you had at lunch. Some of you were thinking, what? That's all he had was the salad? What about the maha that he stole? Pretending to be austere, but we know he got a stash. Got a stash of sweets. When I had him stand up and count the number of blondes, some of you are thinking, well, how many blondes are really in here? How many are really true blondes? Last month they were redheads. About 6 months ago they were red, they had black hair, now they're blonde. And why do you ask this ridiculous question? Anyway, while they were standing, they were talking, you were having a dialogue going on, and they were also having a dialogue. As they were speaking, they're also wondering, why is he asking me this ridiculous question? These are Maharaj, so I should have the proper etiquette, shouldn't be offensive. What have I got myself into? So they were speaking, but there was also a conversation going on. You were watching, you were hearing, but you also had a conversation going. And that conversation that you had going on was what you were really thinking. Even though you were quiet, would suggest that nothing is happening, but something was happening. Something is always going on with us, all during the day. And Krishna is saying, I want that. I want what is going on to be for me. That means you can be doing the deity service and be doing wonderful puja, and dress the deities very nice, and have very sari, very dodian, very tila, and you're thinking, I'm sleepy today, I'm tired. You're in the temple room, and you're playing and horning, and you're chanting wonderful bhajan with beautiful melodious voice. You're looking at the deities, and in your mind you're thinking, how many people are coming in the room listening to me? Maybe that one girl in the back, maybe she'll think I'm a good devotee. So the mind is going somewhere else, while the actions are doing something totally different. So the real person is not the one who's performing, but it has more to do with what he or she is actually thinking. So we want to work for Krishna, speak about Krishna, Krishna Katha. At the same time, we want to constantly be thinking about Krishna. We want to be engaged in serving, Manaseva, even service, Krishna, in the mind. Especially when the mind becomes more fortified and stronger like that. Then we're becoming more Krishna conscious, always thinking of Krishna as he's asked. And we have a chance to be able to be with him. Because he said, you can come with me, be with me, surrender to me, as you always think of me. So sometimes we have to remind ourselves, what are we really doing in this whole process? We're trying to create within ourselves a certain kind of mind culture. We're trying to establish a certain kind of mind culture on the planet where we are always thinking as we're serving and speaking about Krishna. Let's just do one more little experiment to show this, drive this point home a little more. Now I need a couple of volunteers. More than, let's see. Now I'm going to put you all in Maya for 3 minutes, so you forgive me, okay? You're totally on the bodily platform. Extremely. 100%, 108%. I want someone, and be honest with me now, with all of us, one of the deities, especially Jagannath, he has big eyes, he's looking at me. You can't trick Jagannath. So, I want to have someone come forth who feel that they are very tall. Someone who feel that they are very tall. Okay. All right. Stand right there for me. I want someone to come forth who feel that they are very short. Somebody who feels that they're really short. Who feels that way? Someone, come on. Come forward. One of you, one person. Who feels that way? Come on. Please come. Okay? So put your totally on the bodily platform. Okay, now I need 2 more volunteers. I want somebody to come forward who feels they're too thin. Somebody who feels they're skinny. Huh? Somebody who thinks I'm too thin. Huh? Come forward. Don't be bashful. You were thinking it all the time. Come on. You can share with us. Somebody who basically thinks that they're too thin. Come. Don't be bashful. Jagannath is watching you. Okay? Alright, just stand there. Okay? I need one more volunteer. I need somebody to come forward who thinks they're too fat. Okay? Alright? You're dieting a lot, you think you're too fat. Alright? Come on. Come on. Somebody who thinks that they're too fat. Okay? Alright. On this side. Okay. That's it. No, it's okay. Okay. So she thinks she's too short. She thinks she's height or too tall. She thinks he's too short and too fat. He thinks he's too skinny. Now, too small, too short, rather too tall, too fat, too skinny. Alright, we got all these short das, tall das, fat das, skinny das. Okay. Now, what do you think so much of their internal dialogue is? Her internal dialogue, she goes shopping, she's thinking, let me get shoes with a big heel. These pants, this dress, they make me look shorter. He's thinking, let me fix my hair so. This hat, let me get a hat, makes me 2 inches higher. Huh? So much of her dialogue, internal dialogue. And she's doing things. Huh? She's thinking, well, maybe she likes tall men. Sometimes short girls like tall men. Short boys like tall girls. It adds to their So, as you're doing many things, there's this constant meditation, internal dialogue. She's tall. What do you think she's thinking about a lot of times? Be careful not to bump her head. Worried about the seating. Huh? Is it going to be comfortable? The legs going to be a little long. Looking around thinking, all these men are so low. Don't they grow up? Be careful about getting shoes. Too tall. What do you think she's thinking a lot? She's eating, she's wondering, oh, why did I do that? Took too many sweets today. And too many calories today. She's thinking, when she goes shopping, this will make me look real thin. So, it's all dialogue is going on. He says he's feeling too skinny. So he's thinking, well, maybe if I eat at night, I'll gain more weight. He's thinking, maybe if I wear baggy pants, I'll look bigger. He's thinking, well, maybe I shouldn't dance too much, I may lose more weight. Anyway, you can see. But what you also notice is that she's not really short, she's not really tall, she's not really fat, he's not really skinny. It's all relative. In some parts of the world, she'd be considered average size. In some places, even a little above the norm. In some communities, in some societies, she'd be considered average in her height. In some places, she would be considered skinny. Yes. You're supposed to go there. Just like in Africa, she'd be considered skinny. Huh? In Africa, the man is fat, the woman is fat, it means life is good for you. It means you got power, you're eating nicely. Huh? So it's all relative. And then he's thinking that he's thin. There are millions of men who would love to have his size. Huh? Would love to have his height, his weight. Huh? He is quite average. But his internal dialogue is that he's thin. So basically we see, even what they're telling themselves isn't fully so truthful. Because not really such an issue. But how much of their life often is geared around that internal dialogue. As such. Thank you all very much. So in so many ways, we are what we tell ourselves. If someone is thinking that they are a failure, they're thinking that a task is too difficult for them, even though it may be something that they distinctly can accomplish, but by telling themselves such, they will have trouble being able to excel and to achieve. We don't want to be puffed up, we don't want to be arrogant. We surely want to avoid low self-esteem. Low self-esteem means that we minimize Krishna's mercy, we minimize Krishna using us, we doubt Krishna's promises, and we check Krishna from coming in to do what he has promised that he will in fact do. We want to have the humility in the mood of Rupa Goswami's Ashabandha prayer, where he's feeling distinctly unfortunate and fallen, but at the same time he knows that Krishna's mercy is far beyond any obstacle or difficulty that we can and might experience. Now, all over the world, because mature world, basically mean people telling themselves the wrong things. Mature world basically means people thinking improper, and therefore their speech and their actions often coincide. I want to look at a few areas, not to put you in the sociological or psychological class, but just to look at a few quick areas where people are constantly telling themselves unhealthy things that's increasing their fears and increasing sort of a dysfunctionalism within their lives. And many of us as devotees, we share some of these things because we're products also of karma, environmental socialization, in the devotional service as well as outside of the devotional service. And because these mental challenges can slow down our devotional progress. So first we want to look at, let's go on the board. These are all areas or the mind reaching out, attacking, and we're having an unhealthy internal dialogue. First, put general anxiety disorder. So these are particularly unhealthy mindsets that have so much to do with fear that has become institutionalized in our consciousness. We've taken shelter of it, we identify with it. Now, I'm going to read some and share some symptoms of this disorder so some of us can see if we may be experiencing some attacks or that we may be having disturbance in this particular category. Now, the general anxiety disorder is not that, people will just get some anxiety for a week or 2 weeks or even for a couple of days. This is normal. Life is about changes and disturbances and challenges and frustrations. But there's some people who have this every day, or people who have it extended for at least 6 months or a year. This is the category we're talking about now. Someone is having these symptoms that I'm going to mention for at least 6 months or over. Inability to relax. Inability to fall asleep or to stay asleep. Trembling or being irritable. Headaches. Twitching of muscles. Sweating or hot flashes. It's not menopause. You have it much earlier than that. Sweating or hot flashes. Men have menopause also. We go through something as well. Lightness of breath. Nausea. Going to the bathroom very frequently. Fatigue or lack of concentration. So this is a small list of some of the things that's associated with general anxiety, where the internal dialogue is constant fear. This is a mantra. You may be saying things, doing things, even sometimes looking good, even sometimes being confident. But this internal dialogue, very fearful, is going on. It's extending itself over a 6 months period. And these are some of the symptoms that one may find themselves experiencing. Inability to relax, inability to fall asleep, stay asleep, trembling, twitching, headaches, sweating, hot flashes, breathlessness, nauseation, going to the bathroom frequently, fatigue, and lack of concentration. Now, if you have one or two of these, doesn't mean that you are dealing with extensive anxiety. But if you're finding that these problems are happening very consistently, they're a part of your life, ongoing part of your life, then embed that the internal dialogue that you're having is unhealthy, you're maintaining, producing this. This is the first category. General anxiety disorder. Let's do the second. Panic attack. Any of you experience from time to time panic attacks? Okay, so maybe 4 or 5. So you know what it is. You know how threatening and devastating it is to your life, how uncomfortable that is. Some generalizations of panic attack. And this can come, panic attack can come upon one in just, like 10 minutes, a rush. It can go and come, can last quite a long time. But panic attack, well, let me ask some of you who experience some of this time. When you're feeling panic attack, what are some of the things that you feel? Yes. You feel claustrophobic. Or boxed in. Huh? Another person who raised hand panic attack. What do you feel when you have panic attack?
Some sort of concentration.
Your concentration goes. You feel disoriented. Sometimes you feel like your heart is stopping. Sometimes you feel choked. Feel like you can't breathe. You feel like you're going to die. Very heavy things. There are millions of people who deal with this every day, who deal with having attacks and deal with the phobia of thinking that an attack may come any minute, or may come under certain circumstances. Riding in the car, riding in the elevator, may come and seeing someone, may come and being in a certain place. And so this constant fear going on. And what also comes with sweating, trembling, nauseation, some of these things. Now, let's go to the third one. Obsessive compulsive disorders. One of the reasons these kind of things are important to look at is because one of the most challenging issues that the world is facing and will face even more in the next 15 years, the World Health Organization has put out reports explaining mental illness. That it is increasing everywhere on the planet, especially because depression is on the rise. That millions and millions of people worldwide are struggling with depression. And it is an equal opportunity employer. They're finding children as young as 5, 6 years old with chronic depression. Doesn't matter whether you're rich, you're poor, you're male, you're a woman, you're a child, that depression is on the rise. Which means people having more and more difficulty trying to have healthy mind culture. A lot of it has to do with unhealthy lifestyles, has to do with so much bombardment, unhealthy bombardment of ethers, has to do with so much demonic influence, has to do so much with other people's unhealthy thoughts that's polluting the atmosphere. Frustrations about immature things, over attachment to certain things, on and on and on. But the internal dialogue is unhealthy. Because some of the people can have the same things happen, but if they don't buy into the same internal dialogue, then their feelings are different, and they're living a different kind of life. Obsessive compulsive behavior or disorder is when people are doing things which they know is irrational, but they do these things because it gives a sense of relief. It's not pleasurable, but it gives a sense of relief. If they don't do it, they just experience tremendous anxiety. So obsessive compulsive behavior can be like someone who just washes their hands, 1,000 times a day. Somebody who goes back and locks the door 50 times. Huh? There's some people who do certain things, they just repeat and do it. Even though there's a major part of their intellect that knows that it is not necessary, but they will be in total anxiety until somehow, they're able to do that. And so there are millions of people who have such issues. Any of us in our community right here find that they have problems with this? Compulsive behavior? Okay, 1 or 2, 3 or 4 in the back. They were quite common, much more than we maybe think about. And yes, sure.
I have found that I get this syndrome when I'm in company of somebody who has it.
Okay.
I've seen people having it in various degrees.
And then you find that you picked it up.
If my boss has it or somebody like a teacher has it, then you would be like that as well.
Okay. Yes. Some people have that tendency is there when they're around somebody who has it, it kind of ignites it, within themselves. And they start doing the same, idiosyncratic tendency.
So maybe it's an attachment state.
Yes, it can be. Now, another we put number 4, maybe do another sheet. Phobias. Anyone know what's a phobia?
Fear.
A louder?
Fear.
Yeah, irrational fear. So you can see that can connect with some of these other things that we're mentioning. But some people just have an extremely irrational fear of ants, rational fear of snakes, rational fear of spiders. Someone mentioned the other day, fear of snakes, excessive fear. Where They're just really, really disturbed, and even seeing a picture of something, what to say of the real thing. They can have an irrational fear of feeling disturbed when they're in crowds. Some people have a fear, so much so, of social interaction, that they never leave their house. There are people who haven't left their house in 15, 20 years. Who have a rational fear of being with others, and they just can't go to school because their phobia is so intense. Who have a rational fear of heights, rational fear of elevators. They cannot ride an elevator because the internal dialogue is thinking all these dangerous things that can happen, and so it puts the body in a certain mode. Somebody mentioned flight or fright when you're fearful. So like you're dealing with some threatening dogs in front of you going to bite you. So your adrenaline gets affected, you're shaking, you're nervous, so many things. And so when we are having this internal dialogue, we are accepting and experiencing something as if it is happening, and then the body goes into that kind of mode. All of these Jai Shri Shri Madhavendra Swami Ki. Anyone here has extreme fear of heights? Anyone have extreme fear of being closed in? Claustrophobia? Anyone have fear of people? Afraid of everybody. That's why I take the sannyas. Get away. Obeisance at a distance. But, we all have some fears of something. That's why we're in the mature world, because we somewhat afraid of really surrendering to Krishna.
Question. What is always these irrational fears? Are they always irrational, or do they sometimes have something to do with something that's not necessarily?
Both. Just like many phobias, that about 60% of the people can remember how their phobia started. They may have started with some kind of abrupt or dramatic incident in their life. Say someone is afraid of riding in cars. There are tens of thousands of people who have this fear. Or afraid of driving cars. But they notice it started when they had a car accident. 10 years ago. And ever since then, they've had this now irrational fear. But the fear really came from an activity that did in fact take place. That was overwhelming. Let's put one more category. Post-traumatic stress. This is very distinctly in this line. This is the case where a person has so much fear, so much mental and physical disturbance based on some crisis, some trauma that did in fact happen. And so certain situations causes them to relive that experience over. Certain things that are similar, certain things that ignite, or act as a catalyst, to cause that person to experience that traumatic thing that happened to them. Say someone was raped, someone was beat up, someone saw a murder, someone experienced death in some abrupt way to someone else. And so it leaves scars, wounds, marks in the consciousness. And for some people, they may carry these for the rest of their lives. Just like, for instance, to give you an instance in relation to our devotional culture. Now in America, and I hope it's not the same in Europe, here in England. In America, 1/3 out of every girl is sexually abused. 1/5 out of every boy. It's probably even higher than that. Statistics are suggesting this. Pretty seemingly reliable statistics. So now, here it is, people getting abused by someone who's supposed to be their protector, someone who's supposed to be their steward, someone who's supposed to be the ones who are providing for them. Thank you. And so, imagine what this can do. Well, you can imagine. It can cause a person to, for quite some time, in some cases permanently, sometimes for life, sometimes for many lifetimes. It can cause them to fear authorities. It can cause them, even when they're married, to have a dysfunctional relationship. It can cause them to have great trouble in disciple-guru relationship. Because they are carrying this strong internal dialogue and fear that I'm going to be abused. Or they have accepted the mentality that I'm worthy of being abused. And so people are carrying so many things based on experiences that they've had. And you look at the billions of people, if these statistics are right, who are being scarred in various ways. And so as devotees, we want to be able to, I put it here on the bottom. We want to name it, face it, feel it, and release it. Name, face, feel, and release. That if we are not able to be clear about what's going on, we have these underlying problems that will act like a cancer. We are in denial. We may be in denial physically and verbally, but we cannot be in denial mentally. So the internal dialogue will be going on. And so if we are able to face it, we're able to bring out what the internal conversation is, the internal thoughts, the internal processing, so that we can grab it, feel it, and finally be able to release it. We don't name it, we don't face it, it's no question of being able to honor the feel so we can go beyond it. Sometimes the only way out of pain is through pain. Sometimes the only way out of being free of something is being able to really to recognize it so we can see what it's done to us or what it's doing to us or how it's stagnating us or how it's causing us sometimes to do the same thing we want to avoid. One of the reasons we emphasize internal dialogue, because yesterday we were looking at the things that we want the most are the same things that we fear the most if they don't happen. We're looking at that there's only prema, but prema, when it comes in contact with the most virtual nature, it becomes common. And so similarly with internal dialogue, that so many things that we don't want, but if we're constantly having a mantra of such, we will produce just that. So often, a girl marries just the kind of bad father that she had. She marries a guy who's just like that. The last thing she wants. Sometimes the boy has a very bad relationship with his mother. And just the thing that he doesn't want, he marries a woman who is just like his mother. Because so much of this dialogue is just situated on such, and it just draws just what you don't want. So we're looking at the fact that transformation is a matter that something is there, and now we have to just have a reorientation. That what is really fear is actually love, the energy of love that is not being honored in the proper way. So now let's flip over one more time. We want to look at a few ways of how to handle any kind of problem. Alright? Now I'm going to be a magician, right? We'll take away all your problems. With mystic power. After all, what's the use of being a guru if you don't have mystic power? Who wants a guru who doesn't have mystic power? Okay. So today in Soho Street, 100-degree weather, we're going to use our mystic power. Turn it into 75 degrees. So, we'll look at a few skills, a few techniques, and how to address any problems. We have so many wonderful techniques, we're just going to remind you of most of them. But we'll give you 8. First, of course, is what we all know. Number 1, Sharanagati, or full surrender. Atmanavedi. So, full surrender. Full surrender means you don't worry about anything. Nothing matters. Huh? Just for you and Krishna. Krishna's going to take care of you because He's promised. But now, everything we do is to work up to that, isn't it? But that's the foremost. Just surrender. And whatever happens, it just happens. Whatever doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. And you just get out of this place, you go back to Krishna. Everything is just something like a bad, dream or nightmare that you pass through. Second, we take shelter, of course, of Guru, and of course, third, Shastra, fourth, Sadhu. So these are the basic ones that we live by every day. We try to live by. Any problem, any issue, any incoherence, we want to see how we can surrender, but we know that's not so easy overnight because we fear we don't have the faith. But then we try to develop the faith by taking more shelter of Guru, try to develop the faith by being more fixed in Shastra, try to develop the faith and be free of the fear, by healthy sadhu association. Now we go to some other additional ones to help us to do those. 5. Personal assertion. Sometimes we have to just get off our butts. We have to be active. We have to do something. Many times we worry and worry. We have time tomorrow to discuss that a little bit more. But often worry is a substitute for healthy action. Sometimes by worrying we feel, okay, I'm doing something. Worry. It's a substitute for a way to avoid healthy action. So sometimes, number 5, the way to make a difference, to deal with any problem, is that we have to be involved. We have to assert. Many times we just don't say anything, we just, let things go on. We see, we don't see, we hear, we don't see. Sometimes a simple way to deal with an issue is just to posit yourself. Say something. Do something. Number 6. Another important area is projecting in somebody else's shoes. That's like putting on somebody else's sandals. Projection in someone else's shoes. Because you know what that means? That means that so often we can resolve a problem or conflict by trying to think the way the other person was thinking, trying to understand why the other person did and said what they did. Many times we can forgive someone a lot easier. And forgiveness doesn't mean that we accept what they did in the sense that it was okay. Forgiveness doesn't mean that we allow them to continue to do what they did to us. Forgiveness doesn't mean that we were wrong and they were right. Forgiveness doesn't even mean that we have to even associate with the person continuously. But it means something we do for ourselves. We're ready to say yes to the present. We're ready to be loving in spite of whatever the person's Maya is. We're being ready to say yes to Krishna, regardless to whatever else is going on. We're ready to learn from the past while we look to the future. Forgiveness is something we do really for ourselves. We don't forgive, we're allowing whatever assault or offense a person made to us constantly attack us again and again and again by carrying that person and carrying that action every day in our minds with our internal dialogue. Anyway, maybe in the future we give you a whole course, course on forgiveness. But so much of being free from the fear, unhealthy fear, being more whole, and also being free of some of these enemies of the mind and these particular disorders is being able to forgive. So that means facing it, naming it, facing it, feeling it, and releasing it. So number 6, how to deal with any problem, is that sometimes we have to move out of our own comfort zone and we need to put ourselves in the other person's shoes. It doesn't mean we will necessarily agree, but we can at least have a better understanding of why somebody did something based on their perception or based on the facilities that they had. We're all made for love. We are loving. The ultimate activities, ultimate sambandha relationships is all about rastapa, is all about eternal enduring, adventurous, animated love. And so just as fear is just covered over love, just as all actions are really for Krishna, if you think about it, eating, dancing, dressing is really for Krishna. Eating, dancing, mating, any of these things really only have ultimate meaning in relationship to Krishna. It's what goes on in the spiritual world. All the things we do here is just some perverted reflections of what goes on in the spiritual world. So we're far from being impersonalist avoiders because we realize that not only is the spiritual world full of variegatedness, not only is there personal relationships, but real variegatedness, real relationships are those of the spiritual world. Everything else is just some kind of glimpse of what goes on in the spiritual world. Everything is really just Krishna. And it's just a matter of our perception that brings a temporary covering. See, the whole Mahatattva and the whole mature world is really nothing but like this pen, and I have it covered. It's still in the room, still existing, but it's covered over. So everything really is the spiritual world. Even what we think is the material world and material existence is really just a covering within the spiritual world, a corner that's covered over. And so spiritual realization and all the things we're trying to do, the angas of devotion, and especially always thinking of Krishna, really means what we do for uncovering, to accept what we really are. So if we're really Satchidananda Vigraha, the soul, then the question is how to be free from the coverings. And so these various ways, and especially this call for love. You can take anger, you can take enviousness, you can take any kind of obnoxious activity, and you can leave it only as that. And then you have to also play into it, because you've accepted that, and you have to react to that. Or you can take the higher ground, and when somebody is jealous, you see that as an anxiety, because they're feeling the love that should have come to them is going somewhere else. Somebody is envious, they're feeling that they deserve it better, more than where it went. Or they're feeling that somebody else is getting more affection, more love, more attention, more this, more that. So they're envious. Somebody's angry because they're uptight, that they're not being energized by some kind of loving symptoms expression, some sort of needs that are pleasurable. Someone is violent, you can take any activity and you can see it only as a negative, or you can try to go beyond that to look closer at what is the higher need that is not being addressed. What aspect of love is not being received? Some of you read my Spiritual Warrior 2 book. I talk about this somewhere. The same things that call for love. Important for us as devotees because we want to always be Krishna conscious. So that means that we have to be able to see Krishna behind all kinds of things in order to be always thinking of Krishna as he has asked. Because we always think of Krishna, it means that even where there is genuine challenges and genuine problems, we don't go into denial, but we still see how to glorify Krishna or how to become more Krishna conscious. Like some of you said, that sometimes when you see somebody doing something unhealthy, one of the mothers mentioned that, and she allows herself to use that to look at her own self and try to work on self-purification, the self-inventory. And so you can just be disturbed by another person's negativities, or you can see also what perhaps do you need to change in yourself to change that person. Maybe you can change the person, maybe they're not willing to change. But at least you don't want to let somebody else's Maya bring you down to the same level. Or you don't want their Maya to dictate your particular life. So you learn from good activities and things that are not healthy. You look at that and you learn from that as well. So I'm going to stop here. So I won't overload you today. I think we've had enough today. We only have about 5-10 minutes more. As hot as it is. But maybe we just do a quick summary of what we discussed so far. Before that, because of our time, I want to give you your homework assignment for tomorrow. We enter into our part 3 discussion. We want you to think between tonight and tomorrow we come together again about times that you sabotage yourself with your own fears. That means sometimes we are our worst enemy, and how our fears causes us to sabotage ourselves. Some people are afraid of success. Some people, they do things in their lives unconsciously, based on internal dialogue, so they will not be successful. Sometimes we can be a little more wary of how we are our worst enemy. So I want you to just do a little reflection from now until tomorrow on some ways of how you are your worst enemy. You sabotage yourself. And it may be fear of success. But particularly look at some ways of how you find that you're your worst enemy. So we just want to do a quick summary so that we can all be together tomorrow. Okay, we can start here. So we started off discussion yesterday by mentioning about how we learn. And 10-20%, this is in general, that we learn 20% what we read, 30% what we hear, so. But mainly we learn basically 70% of what we discuss. We learn and get grasp better, 80% what we participate in, 90% what we teach. Fear is to be considered sometimes as false evidence appearing to be real. We're talking basically about unhealthy fears. There are some fears that are good. We'll try to mention that maybe tomorrow. Fear responses, we ask, what are some of the things that we feel, emotions, when we are experiencing fear? We have this amazing list. Disturbance, anxiety, confusion, doubt, anger, so many things. All negative, powerful negative things. And then we looked at when we feel love. What are some of the emotions that we find ourselves feeling that come upon us? And the opposite, tremendous list of wonderful, beautiful, auspicious things. Happiness, eagerness, peaceful, self-confidence, feeling fulfilled, value, inspired, etc. And then we looked at things that we most fear. So we went around and we asked, you raise your hand actually, we go around with you, raise your hand, and you gave different things that you felt were things that were bothering you, that are more prone to having fear toward. We had this list here of about 21 things. And of these, 3 was very prominent, and those were offending devotees, losing devotee association, and having various failures. We asked some of you to share some ways of how you are being successful in dealing with some of those specific fears. And today we shared a few also. And then our discussions today, we read some things from Bhagavad Gita, particularly Krishna saying, always think of me, letting us look closer at that. This is what we're really about. International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Although we do so many other activities, but it really comes down to being Krishna conscious. We had volunteers come up and to speak something, and we were doing that so that you could see how you were thinking various things while you were also watching and being absorbed and hearing, but something else was going on in the mind, different from what was being said. We also let the 2 people see that even while they were speaking, that they were also having an internal conversation. Now we're looking at how Krishna is saying, think of me. So what we're thinking is so important. And then we're looking at some particular areas where people have constant, protracted, unhealthy thinking that causes various kinds of disorders. And one disorder we had was general anxiety disorder. I gave you some of the symptoms. Some of you are experiencing this. Panic attacks. All distinct categories of fear, where the internal dialogue is going on in such a way that it produces certain symptoms with the body and with the mind. All of these can shut us down in different ways from being able to be more joyful in our Krishna consciousness. It can shut us down to being able to receive more when we read and when we have sadhu association. Phobias, unhealthy or irrational kinds of fears, post-traumatic stress. And now we're having more and more people dealing with this because people are having so many crises in their lives that's scarring them. And as devotees, we are supposed to be caretakers. So another reason this kind of discussion is significant is that we need to service our own communities better, so we need to have more skills to help society. And as more people are having unhealthy mind culture, and this is going to increase in the future, like anything, within our own society as well as within the world. And we want to be able to be agents, change agents, where we can help people to see that Krishna is their well-wisher, a great provider, protector. But if we just chant the Lord's name purely, that's all that's necessary. But in order to do that, most of us need to have certain blocks dealt with so that we can do that more genuinely. Otherwise, why do we have people chanting Hare Krishna for 30 years? And they're obnoxious. No? Some people have been chanting for a long time. Coming to Mangalarti almost every day. And they have a lot of dysfunctional patterns because the blocks are there, the weeds are there, etc. And so dealing with some of the weeds, he said, name it, face it, fill it, and release it. Then we look at how to handle any problems, and of course the main way is that we surrender. And this is what we should always be our goal, to do the angas with such depth that it eradicates any type of nesha. To assist us in that, we have Guru, we have Shastra, we have Sadhu. And then we gave these last things here, and that sometimes we just have to assert ourselves, and it makes a difference. Other times, 6, we have to project ourselves in another person's shoes. And it helps us then to appreciate why someone did a certain thing. Even if we may agree to it later, we may not even agree, at least we understand and appreciate that person's association a little better, or we have better knowledge of how to help that person, seeing things through their particular glasses or their eyes. To disassociate. Other times, we are so close to something that we really can't solve it or help. Because we're so close that we're only seeing it a certain way. Or we are personally involved. So there are times when we have to disassociate ourselves, as if we kind of distance ourselves and we're watching in, then we have more clarity. And then the other one was to see unhealthy emotions as a cry or as a call for love. So when something is going on, instead of just immediately writing the person off or saying that they're just a nonsense, and so they're some kind of imbecile, they're just an operati or demon, and we try to look a little closer to understand what's behind that, to see that person is crying. To the degree that someone is obnoxious, it's often to the degree that they are paining and crying inside, or having some internal conflicts, and they're expressing it in an unhealthy way. So keep your assignment in mind, that you want to look particularly at some ways of how your own internal dialogue causes you, to sabotage things in your own life. As we become more mindful, our whole Krishna consciousness just takes on a whole other aspect and flourishes. But usually we involve our bodies, and the mind is all over the place. We want to involve our bodies, our minds, and most important, the mantra. So we're chanting, asking for the Lord. We want to genuinely be calling Him, whatever that we're doing. One of the ways to deal with some problems is to assert ourselves. So in this case, you may find you have to take some action. Either you rise in the corporation and find how to be a change agent, or you enter into another situation where you can work, create a sense of happiness, create a sense of well-being, or you can be focusing on more of a spiritual type of lifestyle. So I assume that environment is somewhat against your ability to function as a spiritualist. Let's shift to one other area, Let's look at a time in our lives, or an instance, when we had serious things to fear. Could even be physical assault or physical threat. But we can see that even though we had genuine reasons to fear, that there was some divine intervention. That Krishna arranged somehow for our security, our protection. So we can think of, we're looking at, isn't it, at the whole idea of fear as an obstacle, an enemy of the mind. We're also trying to see how to use it for us, how to transform it. We're realizing we can be often less and less fearful as we take more shelter of Krishna. And as we remind ourselves often of how Krishna has delivered, has come forth to protect us, how he has fulfilled his promise that he'll carry what we lack and maintain what we have. We look at an area where there was genuine reason to be fearful. But we just depended upon Krishna, and we see that he made the change, he made the adjustment, or he even brought, some specific protection. Something that was of a disturbance to you, something that was inauspicious, and was definitely impacting upon your consciousness, causing disturbance and fear and anxiety. But you took the high ground and just tried to depend on Krishna, or you took the high ground in trying to do the Krishna conscious thing, being ready to accept whatever the consequences were, and you saw how Krishna actually rewarded you, facilitated you for doing the right thing. See, there are times when we're very indecisive about being proper, because there's a risk sometimes. But as we remind ourselves that there are so many instances in each of our lives, we have done the right thing and we have gotten reciprocation. And this can help to increase our faith and increase our ability to keep trying to do the right thing as we remind ourselves, yes, when we do depend more on Krishna, that divine intervention can and does happen. Someone can share maybe a point when there was at a crossroads, having to make some major decision, and you just did the thing that would be spiritually correct, even though there was some fear of repercussion or some fear in some other area. You just tried to be as Krishna conscious as possible. And because of that, you see, or you saw later, how Krishna came to your aid. Not just accepting only what manifests, the negative thing, but trying to see it as a cry for love. And so there's a particular case that she has dealt with where someone was doing something that was improper, obnoxious, or whatever. And she did not just allow the fear to cause her not to associate or act in the proper way. And she tried to just think in a Krishna conscious way. Now, how did we find, in this case, that this is an example of Krishna's divine intervention? Did this help this person? Did it bring some improvement in the way that you dealt with the situation?
Because I have faith in them, it allowed them to gain faith.
Okay, very nice. So in this case, because she had faith in the person who was struggling, who was having an issue, instead of not just allowing herself only to fear and run away or mark the person off, she depended on Krishna and tried to help. And this helped to empower the individual. This is good. And so there was threat of even being put in jail. But on the order of Mahaprabhu and Srila Prabhupada, to try to make the message available to every town, every village, they maintained some faith and determination in trying to see how to do this in spite of the threat of being put in jail or being stopped. And because of this sincerity and dedication, Krishna made a way how they could. So often if we have a duty to do, we have vows to follow and also specific duties. if we carry them out devotionally, then Krishna will arrange in so many ways to help us and do so many things. Because He promised it. We just have to often put it to a test. Like when Draupadi, she was such a fearful situation. And here she was around all these Maharathas who should have been able to protect her, but none of them were. And the robe was constantly being, her sari was constantly being taken up. And as soon as she just cried out, "Hey, Govinda!" Just depended upon the Lord. And that was full help. So there are times when we are even interfering from the help that's there. The story of Amarish Maharaj and Devasa Muni. Prabhupada says in the purport that even before Devasa Muni offended Ambarish, that Krishna had already arranged for his protection. Because he was fully with Krishna and Krishna was fully with him. So we teach ourselves, each other as well as our own self, we look at in so many instances where Krishna, in fact, helped us so that we have more trust and faith. Because faith also has to do with experiences coming through. It has to do with past situations where you now have reason to honor that person's trust because you see that they did deliver. And if we don't from time to time reflect on how Krishna has delivered, we won't have faith about what He can do for us in the future. See, many times we just take for granted, or we forget, or we just kind of put it to the side. How many ways Krishna has really helped us? And we all can write a book about the many ways of how Krishna has come forth in our lives. But still, the craziness of the mind says, well, He may have helped you then, but what about now? Maybe He's taking vacation. Maybe it's not really true that Krishna is someone who's maybe He's not really equal and kind to everyone. And so, even one day can be success. And cynical people are like that. Cynical people, they say, oh, it's not possible, it can't happen. And when something happens, they say, yeah, it happened then, but you wait 5 years later and see what happens. They just can't accept basic reality. Because they're just constantly telling themselves that life is a mess, that people are not good, that everything is deviant. And even when something is not like that, they anticipate it, and they look into it. Sometimes they interpret things in a way that's improper. And each of us, we say, have so many instances in our lives when rationally something bad was to happen, all the probabilities, but we depended on Krishna, and Krishna made certain adjustments, certain arrangements. But we have to stop now. I want to do a quick summary because it's almost time for the RT. But we do want to have less fear, less anxiety, and really be able to not stop that excitement or anticipation. Instead of anticipating a bad thing, we want to use that excitement and direct it more at the lotus feet of the Gandhishwara. We want to use this adventure that we have in thinking of all the bad things that can happen with the fear. Think of all the wonderful, good possibilities that are there. We want to allow the mantra in the mind not to be, I can't do it, I won't do it, not to be, that it's not going to happen, it's impossible, and even if it happens, it's not going to last. So that we have a whole life of negativity. We don't want to be so much thinking, oh, I shouldn't think of sex, sex. Huh? No. We do just think about this is the thing that we don't want. So we do a quick 5-minute summary. Now you can write anything. So we started off by emphasizing about the importance of discussion, participation, and teaching. So from your sharings, we did a lot of this, discussing, and from some of the dyads participating. And as you shared things that you taught yourself by remembering that, as we heard it, we also had a chance to look at our own lives or to gain some knowledge from your experience. We're discussing how fear, and negative fear, is often false evidence appearing to be real. Several of the verses and quotes that we read from different scriptures emphasizing how fear is dealing with the illusory aspect of existence, is dealing with a mindset of separation from Krishna, that when one is more Krishna conscious, less body conscious, then one has no fear. As Krishna is telling us, do not worry, do not fear. And so he's letting us know that that he's controlling all things. So we just have to accept, yes, Krishna, all things are coming from you. And therefore, we want to be more under your shelter. We ask for fear responses. What are some of the things that we experience? What kind of emotions come upon us when we are in a fearful state? So we got all these negative things. Anxiety, defense, doubt, anger, shaken, poor appetite, lack of sleep. So we were starting off by showing how when we're fearful, it affects us physically. We're more susceptible to disease. We're more susceptible to chronic disease. More susceptible to premature death. We get hardened of arteries. That many of our diseases, when the mind is disturbed, and the mind is then sending unhealthy energy to different organs. And so it has an effect on us physically, it has an effect on us socially, emotionally, and also the fears often produce different kinds of aparats. It then affects us spiritually, or it causes us to shut down. We can't be loving entities, which we are by nature, with soul descended on the Vigraha. We can't really be fully present, fully wholesome, fully receiving love and giving love when fear has caused us to shut down and keep distance, when fear has caused us not to trust, when fear has caused us, personal fear has caused us not to do the best of what we can do, because we've already accepted that we're going to be failures. We mentioned about when we feel love, the opposite things, emotions, come upon us. We see many, many wonderful things. We feel love, we're happy, we're peaceful, we feel eager, self-confident, safe, fulfilled, spontaneous, fearless, overwhelmed, feel valued, purpose in life, we feel empowered, inspired, pretty much the opposite. Then we looked at some of the things that we as a group most fear. And we got this awesome list of over 21 different items or areas of emotions. And then we tried to see which three are most outstanding for us as a group. And those three, of course, was offending devotees, the thing that we fear the most. And this is the way a Vaishnava should think. Vaishnava's greatest healthy fear should be offending other Vaishnavas. Because it's one of the things that will guarantee procrastination, stagnation, and even failure in the spiritual life. And as you honor and associate in a healthy way, doesn't mean that you're in denial. Because serving means sometimes you have to assert yourself. There will be distinct categorical progress, healthy sadhu sangha. And then there was a lack of fear of losing association and fear of just general and all kinds of failures. So we won't lose the association if we really want it. We said nobody falls into Maya who doesn't want to fall into Maya. Meaning that if our greater sentiments and desires are stronger for Maya than for Krishna, then we will fall or become allured by some Maya. But whenever our desires for service and to be devotional are stronger, there's no question of falling, because Krishna will accommodate our desires and give us the strength. We then looked at some of the unhealthy mindsets with that very structured fear that produces different kinds of unhealthy relationships. It causes dysfunctional activities and interactions. So we had the first category of general anxiety disorders. We gave a whole list of different things that happen when you have this problem. Lack of sleep, trembling, problems with nauseation, going to the bathroom frequently, feeling very tired. These are symptoms, there's a whole lot of them. But we have them for over a 6-month period. Sign of excessive anxiety, panic attacks. Some of you who have this as a mental health issue, you share with us what you encounter when this happens. You feel like you're going to die. You feel like you're feeling choked. You feel like you can't breathe. You feel fainting, pains and things. Obsessive compulsion, when someone has this irrational fear or involvement that they know it's irrational, they just keep doing something over and over again. And as they do it, they feel some relief. So they do it not for pleasure, but they do it just to be free of some of the anxiety that something keeps bombarding them. They may wash their hands 100 times in 10 minutes. Go back and lock the door, lock the car 50 times, even though it's already locked. They just feel this fear, and so they just keep doing something. Phobias, irrational fears. It can be excessive things, fear of snakes, excessive fear of spiders, fear of heights, fear of enclosure, fear of making some mistake, looking foolish. And so these are things that one is putting too much internal dialogue into, and now leading an imbalanced life. Some people are afraid for socialization, and they stay in the house. There are people who haven't been out of their house in 20, 30 years. 5, post-traumatic stress disorders. These are cases where something has actually happened to a person, some abuse, some violence, something very traumatic, and it has left a serious scar. And so whenever there is some circumstance or situation that is similar or that reminds them of what happened, they often experience the whole attack or the anxiety or the pain that they experienced from that particular event or occurrence. So there are many people, millions of people, who are dealing with post-traumatic stress based on some unhealthy things and inauspicious things happening. Now they carry it with them. We mentioned about the power of forgiveness. We didn't have much time to talk about that, but that's a whole workshop in the course itself, looking at how Vaishnavas forgive and how forgiving really helps us to move away from so many things. It helps us to accept that, yes, this happened, but we don't want this thing to keep repeating itself, happening to us by carrying it more and more in our consciousness. So forgiving is something we do mainly for ourselves, even more for the other person. So when we do find that there are issues and problems, if we just try to go into denial, it will surface like a cancer and have underlying unhealthy things. Or if we overreact and we just feed it, like throwing fuel into the fire. So we do have a duty to try to get a hold, a name, what is going on, to face it. And as we face it, often we have to feel it. Sometimes the only way through pain is to recognize it, to feel it, to be able to move away from it. Then we release it. Name it, face it, feel it, and release it. Then we gave some evaluation of how to handle problems. Some techniques to aid us in handling any kind of problems, given that we are pure entities by nature, and if we can be void of these problems, what's left is our pure self. Full surrender, Sharanagati, which is what the ultimate goal is. And how do we move toward that? By honoring Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. And as we honor Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, we have then so much technology of how to be free once and for all out of this material prison. But sometimes we have these high goals, and we may be here, we discussed in the class today, we understand transcendence, we talk about it, but we're not experiencing it because we're too much in the mode of passion and the mode of ignorance. So some of the things that help us to move out of that is what we've given you here. Just some technology. Sometimes we can deal with issues by just personally asserting ourselves. Sometimes we can deal with issues by putting ourselves into someone else's shoes. We try to understand how that person is thinking, what they're doing that causes them to act in a certain way. Other times that we have to disassociate. We are the subject or the object, but now we move as if we're looking in at somebody else doing this. We're looking at ourselves and observing it at a distance, trying to evaluate it from a deeper perspective. We can get additional insights in this way. And then last, about being able not to just accept things face value, negative emotions from others, but to realize that we're all really devotees. We're discovered devotees. We have different degrees of addictions, different degrees of craziness. So we try to see how that person is a devotee who is struggling in some way, or we try to see what is the love that's being needed. We see any emotion, anger, enviousness, we're talking now fear, any kind of unhealthy emotion, instead of just stopping there and then reacting on that same kind of level, we see it as a cry for love, to see how we can help that person, or to see what we need to change in ourselves to change that other person. You are wonderful students. I learn a lot from you. This is my secret. I pretend to teach something, but I'm really trying to learn something. So keep in mind some of the things. This is really a week's course, and we try to give it to you in 3 days. But especially try to be more careful with what you are thinking, and realize everything is there. There is only prema, and we just have to transform it to transfer the karma into prema. The things we fear the most are also the things that we want. The things we want the most are the things we have the greatest fear if they don't happen. So we want Krishna. We want Radhalanjaneswara, Jagannath Baladev, Subhadra. Jai is coming from the Jada Siddharabhad ki. Jai Radhalanjaneswara ki. Jagannath Baladev, Subhadra ki. Vaishnava the Gaur ki. Krishna, Krishna,